of Uganda, Yoweri Museveni, confirmed that they had abducted or arrested Bob Njagi and also Nicholas Oyoo for what he terms as that they were working very close with the opposition leaders, Bobi Wine of Uganda, and also campaigning, and he termed them as the experts in riots, in planning demonstrations. That is what had transpired in the country. But earlier on, from Uganda, they had mentioned that, we don't know or we are not aware of the people that have been arrested. That is as per the report that was given earlier on from the military. Later on, it was confirmed by the president. And the two duo, that is Bob Njagi and Nicholas Oyoo, were released on the intervention of some leaders from the country. That is the reason to why they got released. And it was something that people do say that it was the former president Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta who had made a phone call for them to be released. And that is all for what has been covered in this newspaper. That is the Standard newspaper, that they talk about the weak-kneed diplomat. That is on story published on page 6 of this newspaper this morning. Whereas as we move on to the Daily Nation, also a similar story, and which has been given, which has been published on page 2 and page 3. That is the Daily Nation, and they do mention about our torture. That is our torture ordeal. Abductions. President Yoweri Museveni admitted holding the duo who he described as KO experts. And here, the tribulation, that is what began as a brief cross-border visit for that is for Kenyan activist Bob Njagi and Nicholas Oyoo, turned into a brutal test of endurance that neither of them will ever forget. For the 38 days, they were blindfolded, that is blindfolded, and as well as chained to their chairs, and also beaten in dark and cold dungeons. That is their mistake traveling to Uganda to attend the manifesto launch of the country's opposition leader, Bobi Wine. That's a story published on page 2 and also page 3. What the president of Uganda terms to be the chaos experts from Kenya. But whatever they are went there to do is to attend the manifesto launch that was being launched by the opposition leader, Bobi Wine, or Kyagulanyi of Uganda. And then they were abducted. And elsewhere, what Mr. Nicholas Oyoo mentioned is about, we went to Uganda because we are East African community citizens. I keep asking myself, what wrong we did we do by crossing the border. That is Nicholas Oyoo. When we move a little bit up of this newspaper to get more of what they had done there and elsewhere. That is what the president of Uganda mentioned. Just to quote, they have been with us. I have their names. They were working with Kyagulanyi's group, and they are experts in chaos. That is the President Yoweri Museveni of Uganda. They are talking or quoting of what he had said earlier on that led him to abduct or arrest and also torture these two men. That is the activist Bob Njagi and also Nicholas Oyoo. Moving on. This is on page 4, a little bit down of this newspaper, is that 4 billion shillings debt threat to senior school rollout. That is, printing firms have declined to produce grade 10 textbooks over a debt of 4 billion shillings for grade 8 and 9 books they have supplied since 2022, a standoff that now threatened to delay the rollout of the competence-based education, that is CBE. And all this is because the government still owes publishers 10 billion shillings for their school textbooks. And now printers are demanding that publishers clear the outstanding bill before they can work on the next order. That is a story published on page 4, talking about the grade, that is the grade 10 students that will be joining next year. And also here now the printing firms have declined to produce books for grade 10. And it's because of a debt of 4 billion shillings that grade 8 and 9 books that they had supplied since 2022, and that debt has not been paid. Then it brings a standoff that now threatens to delay the rollout of the competence-based education, that is CPE, and this is because the government still owes publishers 10 billion shillings for the school texts, and now the printers are demanding that the publishers should clear the outstanding bill before they can work on the next order. That is a story published on page 4. Now, some of the issues that are affecting the Ministry of Education and education at large in the country. Now that the books, if they will not be available by January, because we are approaching next year 2026, and we are at the 13th day of November, just remaining is only 1 month and some roughly 2 weeks for us to get to finish the year as we start 2026. And we are expecting that by January, around the date 6 there, the schools will be opened. And now if there's no enough materials for the grade 10 students, that is we are delaying on the ordeal that is supposed to be made, and also the transition, what we can be terming as the smooth transition from grade 9 to grade 10. And that is one of the things that is affecting education. And maybe the publishers and the printing firms here can have a conversation with the government to ensure that their debts have been paid as they start now to print the new textbooks. Elsewhere, on page 10 of this newspaper, why Kanja wants order halting police hiring lifted. On that is on the left side of the newspaper this morning. Why Inspector General Douglas Kanja now wants police that is wants order halting police hiring lifted. That is Inspector General of the Police, Douglas Kanja, wants the High Court to urgently lift the conservatory orders halting the planned recruitment of 10,000 police constables, citing a critical shortage of officers and looming security threats ahead of 2027 elections. In his court filings, Inspector General Kanja argues that the suspension of recruitment was granted based on material non-disclosure by the petitioner Eliud Matindi, who challenged the legality of the exercise, and also the Rego shutdown stems from November 10th, 2025, ruling by the High Court that suspended the recruitment process that was supposed to start on 17th of this month. And now here, Douglas Kanja is pleading with the High Court that there is a looming security threat as the country is planning its general election, that is in 2027, and as there is a shortage of police officers, that is 10,000 police officer constables that were supposed to be recruited this year or before the year goes, and earlier on it was suspended, then it is scheduled again, then again just 2 days ago it was also suspended, that it cannot be happening until the issue is solved amicably. That is a story published on page 10 of the daily newspaper this morning. A little bit up on page 39, talking about sports. Talking about teenager Kibet. Teenager Kibet overjoyed over the maiden call up to Stars squad. Adrien Kibet, who is a 19-year-old, plays for Celta Figos, reverse team in the Spanish Second Division League, and is part of the Harambee Stars squad that will play Equatorial Guinea tomorrow, and also Senegal on November 18th in Antalya, Turkey. That is a story published on page 39 that the Kenyan born Adrian Kibet, who also plays in one of the clubs in Spanish, that is in the second division league. He will be part of the squad that will be playing with the Equatorial Guinea, and also on November 18th we will be having a match also that will be played in Antalya in Turkey. That's a story published on page 39 of this newspaper here. A little bit, that is some of the stories that have been published in our Daily Nation newspaper. The headline there is that our torture ordeal, that is talking about the torture of Bobu Njagi and Nicholas Oyo, who were abducted in Uganda and tortured for over 30 days, later on released by the authorities of Uganda. Elsewhere, on the People's Daily, there is a story published there. Sometimes you can hear it's funny, but it is factual to some extent, that it's about the health crisis. And then the headline is Ruto's checkup abroad and the Kenyans' reality check at home. What is happening at Kenya currently and what the president sees that happens in abroad. That is, there is a photo there. You can see a visa, a travel visa. You can see a needle there. And then we can be able to see a nurse who is just wondering what is not going on. And that is a clear indication of what is happening. And that's a story published on page 4 talking about the healthy crisis in the country and the reality checks at home here in Kenya, and also what the president checks up abroad there. And then on page 8 is a story published about the former Prime Minister Raila Amolo Odinga, who was also the party leader of ODM. They're talking about the post-Raila era. Will Mountain and Lake family link up? Will the Mountain and Lake family link up? That is a question that they are asking. Will people from Mount Kenya and also people from Luo Nyanza, that is from the lakeside, will they finally link up and continue working together? That is the question after the death of Raila Amolo Odinga. Maybe the question will be answered on page 8 and the facts that are being given out there, talking about politics in the country and the current happenings here and there, and also as now politicians are ganging up for 2027 elections. And also on page 6 of this newspaper, at the top of it is that story published talking about Kindiki's move to secure Mount Kenya amid opposition hit. That is, the deputy president, Professor Kithure Kindiki, is trying to unite the mountain as they are facing the opposition hit from that side of the mountain. And probably after the meeting that they are having, he has been having with the leaders. The other day he was meeting with the leaders, that is the members of parliament also, and the senators from Mount Kenya region, to assess the projects that were being done by the national government, and as well as what has not been done. That is a story published on page 6 talking about Kindiki moves to secure Mount Kenya amid opposition hit in the area. And that is all about the People's Daily newspaper. The main headline there talking about Ruto's check upload, and also the Kenyans' reality check at home. What is happening? That is a health crisis in the country, and many people complaining about SHA not working, and also the government officials are saying that it is working, and also the crisis that we are experiencing in the country, the shortage of doctors and also nurses in hospitals. It's something that is discussed on this health crisis, published on page 4 of the People's Daily. Elsewhere, on the Star newspaper, that is a story published there talking about the headache for Gachagua as Uhuru rolls in Mount Kenya. Jubilee attracting aspirants eager to run or easier to run on its ticket. It's all about who is to say what and who is planning and who is now the kingpin from Mount Kenya. Now they're saying that Gachagua is having a headache because Uhuru is trying to get it back in the mountain, and there is a lot that is expected from different political parties in the country and what exactly is going on. And that is a story published on page 5, page 4 and page 5 of the Star newspaper. Elsewhere besides there is a story that's published that a miracle as a man bedridden for over 20 years walks again. That's a story published on page 6 of the news of this. That is the Star newspaper. That somebody who has been bedridden for 20 years walks again. Staying, not walking, just bedridden for 20 years, that again you walk. Of course, it is a miracle seen by that man, and maybe he is very lucky to walk again. As we move on, and maybe that's a story published again on that, talking about what our doctors in the country can be able to do, as well as the health crisis that people are experiencing, more so the Kenyans, in affording the health care in the country. And elsewhere, on the bottom of this newspaper, it's talking about the Rutos on a 4-day tour of Kalonzo stronghold. It's the tour that the president started yesterday. They're talking about Ruto on 4-day tour of Kalonzo stronghold. Kambani is the home of the Wiper the Wiper party leader Kalonzo Musyoka. And from the pictures that we can be able to see there is that the president launched some of the projects in Ukambani, and also there is a bridge that was launched yesterday, as well as giving out the title deeds to some of the residents of Ukambani. That is something that is started from Makueni County, where his tour started on day 1, and today we will be following up to know where he is moving to and what he is doing in that entire region of Ukambani. Elsewhere, on the other side of this newspaper, that is on the top of it, about graft war. That is talking about corruption, how billions are being looted in counties. They're talking about how the counties or the Kenyan's funds are being looted in counties. That's a story published on page 8 of the Star newspaper, talking about graft war, fighting corruption in the country. And this is something that has been facing Kenya day in, day out, and trying to find a solution on what can be done to ensure that it reduces, something that is not just coming easily, because each and every day the cases reported, and maybe to some extent there is no enough evidence, and then people walk freely. Elsewhere, Sakaja launch a technical team wants Dishi na County made permanent in Nairobi. That is something that the county governor of Nairobi started. That is a Sakaja launch. Technical team wants Dishi na County to be made permanent in Nairobi. That is a story published on this newspaper, that is the Star newspaper, and you can be able to grab it and also know why are they requesting, or why they today want it to be permanent in the county of Nairobi. Reasons being published on these the Star newspapers. As we move on our next newspaper, that is Taifa Leo. There is a story published there talking about the former Prime Minister, the late Raila Amolo Odinga. And they are talking about Raila alivyotafuta ODM usiku Dandora. Afisa mkuu wa kwanza wa chama aeleza Odinga alivyomtafuta kwa lengo la kununua chama hicho kipya. Kila ambacho kinaangaziwa ni kuhusiana vile chama cha ODM kilivyoanza. Ni kwamba afisa mkuu wa kwanza wa chama aeleza Odinga alivyomtafuta kwa lengo la kununua chama hicho kipya. Raila alivyotafuta ODM usiku Dandora, na pale akisema kwamba huku chama cha ODM kikijiandaa kuadhimisha miaka 20 tangu kibuniwe, katibu mkuu wake wa kwanza Jane Wangui Muringi amefichua kwa mara ya kwanza chinzi marehemu Raila Odinga alimtembelea nyumbani kwake mtaani Dandora akitaka kutoa chama hicho ambacho kilisajiliwa baada ya kura ya maamuzi kufanyika, ikiwa kwamba ni taarifa ambazo zimechapishwa katika ukurasa wa pili katika gazeti hili la Taifa Leo, talking about how now the first time when ODM was registered, then Raila Amolo Odinga went to search for the first member of ODM, that is by the name that is Madam who was living in Dandora, that is Madam Wangui Muirigi Jane, wakati ambavyo Raisa the former prime minister alienda kumtafuta ili kutoa chama hicho cha ODM. Na pale kando tunaona ni picha ya baadhi ya wafuasi wa chama cha ODM wakifurahia, na picha ambayo nyingine iko pale kando ni Raila Amolo Odinga akiwa ametapasamu kweli. Vidokezo vingine ni kwamba mbele ni kufa kupona kwa rais, uchaguzi mdogo utaamua iwapo kiongozi wa nchi bado ana ushawishi mlimani, ikiwa ni taarifa ambazo zimechapishwa katika ukurasa wa 4. Wanasema kwamba ni litmus test in the upcoming by elections mwaso from Mbehere. That is where they are going to test whether the president still has a say in the mountain. Also on page 5, koti yampa nabii afueni ya muda. Kiongozi wa kanisa la Zion Fire Anointing Ministries apumua koti ikisema asikamatwe na polisi. Taarifa ambazo zimechapishwa katika ukurasa wa 5. Na kwingineko ukurasa wa 8 pale, kila ambacho kimeangaziwa ni United Nations yataka Tanzania ichunguzwe, yasema kumekuwa na jaribio la kuficha ushahidi na ukweli kuhusu mauaji, na haya ni mauaji ambayo yalifanyika wakati na baada ya uchaguzi kufanywa pale Tanzania tarehe 29 mwezi wa Oktoba mwaka 2025, kwa kwamba ni mwezi ambao umepita. Na sasa United Nations inataka Tanzania ifanyiwe uchunguzi, huku akisema kwamba kumekuwa na jaribio la kutaka kuficha ushahidi na ukweli kuhusu mauaji yaliyofanyika pale. Ni taarifa ambayo imechapishwa katika ukurasa wa 8 katika gazeti hili la Taifa Leo. Ukurasa wa pili pale juu mwa gazeti hili ni kwamba ni wanaharakati walivyoishi kwa friji siku 38 Uganda, na ni historia ambayo imechapishwa na Steve Atieno wakisema kwamba kwa siku 38 wanaharakati wa Kenya Bob Njagi na Nicholas Oyoo walipitia mateso makali walipozuiliwa katika kambi za kijeshi Uganda zinazotajwa kuwa za kutisha, ambapo wafungwa wengi hutoweka bila kupatikana. Rais Yoweri Museveni juzi alikiri kuwa serikali yake ili wakamata wanaharakati hao, akisema walikuwa kwenye friji kwa muda mchache tu, ama kwa siku chache pale. Taarifa bado ambazo zimechapishwa katika ukurasa wa pili, na pale tunaona ni wanaharakati hao wa Kenya waliozuiliwa nchini Uganda wakisimulia masaibi yao mikononi mwa wanajeshi wa nchi hiyo ya Uganda. Na hizo ndizo baadhi ya habari ambazo zimechapishwa katika gazeti hili la Taifa Leo. ikiwa kwamba mada kuu ya gazeti hili inataja kwamba Raila alivyotafuta ODM usiku Dandora, na historia ambayo imechapishwa pale kwamba katibu mkuu wa kwanza wa chama hicho cha ODM alivyosimulia jinsi ambavyo Raila alimtembelea usiku nyumbani kwake Dandora na kumuomba akitoa chama hicho kwake yeye Raila Amolo Odinga, taarifa ambayo imechapishwa katika ukurasa wa pili. Tunapoendelea mbele na kuangazia gazeti letu la mwisho, gazeti la Business Daily, pale ambapo wanataja kwamba Kenya bans electronic imports over 12 years old. New rules seek to protect public from health hazards, and also there are restrictions based on UNEP guidelines. And here they're saying that Kenya is set to ban the importation of electronics such as televisions, refrigerators, smartphones, computers, and other household and industry appliances that are older than 12 years from the manufacturing date, in a war on electronic waste dumping. And this is a restriction proposed under the draft regulation by the National Environment Management Authority, NEMA, aims to minimize the e-waste and also protect the public from exposure to toxic materials linked to cancer and also other health hazards. And the proposed rules seek to stem the growing influx of second-hand and near end-of-life electronics in the country. And from the photo that you are seeing there is some of the electronic appliances and some customers trying to look at some of these appliances that is in shops. And then elsewhere, as we move down, is talking about the telecoms. That is Vodacom rules out hiving off list M-Pesa amid CBK push. That is a story published on this newspaper by Dennis Musau, talking about the Safaricom's parent company, Vodacom, has ruled out splitting M-Pesa from the telecommunications unit and listing it separately as the stock market amid regulatory pressure. And the Vodacom Group CEO, Mohamed Jazoub, told investors during a Monday earnings call that the financial services business provides extra value to service to value the voice of data users, making it difficult to separate the fintech from the telecoms unit. And also investors sought to understand if the firm would follow rival like MTN Group, which is separating Uganda's mobile money business from the telecoms operations, as it seeks to list the fintech separately on the same. That is a story published on this Business Daily on page 5, actually on page 2, talking about the Vodacom rules out hiving off listing M-Pesa amid of the Central Bank of Kenya push. And elsewhere on the ticker, that is talking about what has been published on the ticker, talking about on page 4 of this newspaper. Kenya economy seen growing as fast as pace in 2026. The Kenyan economy is projected to grow at a slightly faster speed in 2026, helped by falling cost of credit, stronger exports, and also improved household spending, a fresh forecast by Global Bank and also think tanks shows. It's a story published on page 4 showing how the Kenyan economy might be growing very fast, that is in 2026. Elsewhere on page 6, the story published about the Tanzanian-based tycoon takes 41.75% control of EAPC, that is the Tanzanian conglomerate, Amazon Group has completed the buyout of 29.2% stake in East African Portland Cement Company, valued at 718.66 million shillings from Swiss, that is from Swiss multinational Horizm. That is talking about companies on page 6 of this newspaper. And also a tycoon from Tanzania has completed the buyout of 29.2% stake in East African Portland Cement Company. That is valued at 718.66 million shillings. Elsewhere, a little bit down, members of parliament lift freeze on new power purchase deal. Talking about the power purchase deal, and now the lawmakers have lifted the 7-year freeze on new power purchase agreement, that is the PPAs, paving way for the new plants to avert a looming electricity generation crisis. The story published on page 4 of this newspaper. And elsewhere, on top of this newspaper is always about the exchange rates, that is from Kenyan shillings to USD, and it still remains at 129.24. Remember, on Tuesday it was 129.24, and also it remains without falling or increasing, and it remains at 0.00%. That is on Wednesday. Yesterday it was 129.24. Elsewhere, story published by Michael Masharia on page 9, talking about intelligence. Founders are expected to be machines of momentum, that is to show up at every crisis while unveiling inside. Story published on page 9, talking about the founders and also the investors, and it's something that you can be able to read on page 9 of this newspaper. Elsewhere on Life, you can be able to see a picture of a well-set table, fruits, and some kinds of foods, and then they're talking about bring your food feasts, take over Kenya parties. It's something that happens almost every weekend here and there on when the Kenyans are partying, and then they're talking about bring your food feasts, take over parties, or take over Kenyan parties. That is a story published on page 9. Remember, you can be able to get this newspaper or the Business Daily newspaper at 100 bob Kenyan shillings, and also Tanzanian shillings 2,000, and the Ugandan shillings 3,000, and also Rwanda's shillings, that is 900 shillings. And that is where we wrap it up on the newspaper review this morning. And remember, on the Business Daily, they are talking about Kenya is planning to ban electronics imported over 12 years old in the country. And elsewhere, what we saw on the Standard newspaper was a weak need diplomat, talking about or the criticism facing the Foreign Affairs Cabinet Secretary, that is Musalia Mudavadi. And elsewhere, we saw the Daily Nation talking about the torture that Bob Njagi and Oyo underwent in Uganda, and also not forgetting that People's Daily, they are talking about what the president is checking up abroad, and also what is happening or the reality in the Kenyans at home, more so the health crisis. And not forgetting that we had the headache of Gachagua as Uhuru rolls in Mount Kenya again. And then in Taifa Leo we saw how Raila alivyotafuta ODM usiku Dandora. And that is what we have, that's what we had in the morning paper review. That is on 13th November 2025. And I would like to take a short break. Once back, I will be taking you through the morning report. Thereafter, we'll be having a conversation or having a look at what has been trending since yesterday. yesterday, and or that is on X, Facebook, and as well as on entire social media platforms. I'm Jeff Nyakundi. Don't go too far, and my director is Lucas Ouma, and we'll be back to let you know what has been happening yesterday and also what is in the morning report.
Unatazama Ndizi TV Africa.
Being healthy is a strive every